The day they erased 700 towns. America's Lost Communities Act of 1938. The dust swirls through abandoned streets in what was once Millerville, Kansas, where 3 weeks ago children played in schoolyards and church bells rang each Sunday morning. Now only foundation stones remain, scattered like broken teeth across the prairie. The Federal Infrastructure Modernization Office's bulldozers finished their work at dawn on September 14, 1938, following directives that would see this scene repeated across 700 American communities before year's end. In filing cabinets in Washington, stamped documents bear the seal of the Lost Communities Act, legislation that doesn't appear in any public congressional record, passed in sessions that officially never occurred, signed by officials whose names were systematically removed from government directories. The photographer from the Farm Security Administration raises his camera to document the erasure, but his supervisor's hand stops him. These towns never existed. There's nothing here to photograph. By December 1938, 700 American communities with a combined population of 1.4 million people would vanish not just from the landscape, but from maps, records, and eventually from memory itself. The object materializes through its absence. Census data from 1930 showing thriving communities that don't appear in the 1940 count, not declining, not renamed, but surgically removed from existence. Granville, Ohio, population 4,200. Riverside, Iowa, population 2,800. Fairhaven, Massachusetts, population 6,100. Each town meticulously documented in the 1930 census with demographics, occupations, property values. Yet by 1940, these same locations show only empty land or are absorbed into neighboring municipalities, with no explanation. Post office records reveal mail routes that serviced addresses that supposedly never existed. Railroad timetables from 1937 list stops at stations that no railway company acknowledges building. State highway departments have contracts for road maintenance to communities that aren't on any official map. The Infrastructure Modernization Office, created by executive order in February 1938, operated with a budget that appears in no appropriation bills, using authority granted by no traceable legislation. The first mystery crystallizes in the selection criteria. The 700 communities chosen for erasure share no obvious characteristics. They span all states, include agricultural and industrial towns, range from 500 to 8,000 residents. Yet classified documents accidentally released in 1987 reveal they all contained something designated as Type 7 anomalies. The nature of these anomalies remains undefined in any available documentation, referenced only by number, as if the thing itself was too sensitive to name. Some towns had existed since colonial times. Others were founded in the 1920s. Some were prosperous, others struggling through the Depression. The only consistency was their selection for complete elimination under the Lost Communities Act. Not relocation, not renovation, but total erasure from physical and documentary existence. The silence surrounding the operation was absolute. No newspaper from 1938 mentions the displacement of 1.4 million Americans. No radio broadcasts discuss the massive federal program. No congressional debates address the largest forced relocation in American history. The New York Times archives show edited pages where articles were physically cut out, leaving rectangular gaps in the newsprint. The Washington Post's morgue files have index cards referencing stories about infrastructure reorganization, but the corresponding articles are missing. Local newspapers from the affected communities themselves vanished along with their towns. Entire print runs collected and destroyed, their editors relocated or silenced. The few journalists who attempted to investigate found themselves reassigned to foreign bureaus or their press credentials revoked without explanation. Suspicion grows when examining the logistics of erasure. Moving 1.4 million people requires transportation, temporary housing, resettlement assistance. Yet no federal agency claims responsibility for this massive operation. The Interstate Commerce Commission shows no record of commandeered trains or buses. The Public Works Administration has no contracts for temporary shelters. The Agriculture Department lists no emergency food distribution. The operation occurred in a bureaucratic vacuum, managed by an agency that officially didn't exist, funded by money that was never appropriated, executing orders that were never given. The only traces are indirect: spike in lumber sales to government purchasers who can't be identified, mass orders for demolition equipment from companies that have no record of the sales, fuel consumption patterns that show massive activity in areas that were supposedly empty. The launch of investigation begins with survivors, though finding them proves nearly impossible. Those who lived in the erased town seem to have been scattered deliberately. No two families relocated to the same place. Death certificates from 1939-1945 show unusual patterns. Former residents of the lost communities dying at rates far exceeding national averages. Causes of death vague or inconsistent. The few who can be traced share a common characteristic: profound amnesia about their former homes. When pressed, they describe their memories as cloudy or distant, as if recalling a dream rather than lived experience. Some claim they must be misremembering, that the towns they describe couldn't have existed because they're not on any map. Others fall silent mid-sentence, as if suddenly remembering they're not supposed to remember. The first discovery emerges from geological surveys conducted in the 1970s. Ground-penetrating radar reveals extensive underground structures beneath 147 of the erased town sites, basements, tunnels, and chambers that extend far deeper than typical construction of the era. These subsurface networks show evidence of sophisticated engineering, reinforced concrete using techniques not patented until the 1950s, electrical conduits for power systems more advanced than 1930s technology, and most mysteriously large spherical chambers lined with lead and copper, in configurations that match no known industrial or residential purpose. Core samples from these sites contain isotopes that shouldn't exist in nature, materials that would require particle accelerators to produce, decades before such technology supposedly existed. The expansion of scope reveals the Lost Communities Act was part of something larger. Treasury Department records, cross-referenced with Federal Reserve data, show massive capital flows in 1938 that don't correspond to any known economic activity. Approximately $2.8 billion, roughly $50 billion in current dollars, moved through accounts that existed for only 3 months. The money appeared from nowhere, paid for something that officially didn't happen, then vanished without entering normal circulation. Military records from the same period show the deployment of 45,000 troops for domestic infrastructure support, but no unit histories mention this operation. The soldiers involved appear to have been selected from different divisions, served together briefly, then returned to their units with no official record of their temporary assignment. The clash with established knowledge becomes unavoidable when examining the demographic aftermath. The 1940 census shows America's population grew by exactly the expected amount, as if 1.4 million people hadn't been displaced. Birth records from 1939-1941 show impossible spikes in certain regions, towns reporting 3 times their normal birth rates, hospitals delivering babies to mothers who don't appear in any previous records. These replacement populations seem to have emerged fully formed, with complete histories, employment records, and social connections that investigation proves couldn't have existed before 1939. It's as if the erased populations were replaced with new people who were retroactively given pasts that never occurred. The second layer mystery deepens with the discovery of Project Occidental in declassified War Department files. This program, running parallel to the Lost Communities Act, involved the construction of 700 community replication centers at classified locations. The blueprints for these centers match exactly the layouts of the erased towns: street patterns, building positions, even tree placements duplicated with surveyor's precision. But these weren't rebuilding projects. The centers were constructed in remote areas of Nevada, Montana, and Alaska, places where the recreated towns would have no economic or strategic purpose, unless, as some documents suggest, they weren't meant for human habitation at all. The mapping of the unknown reveals patterns invisible from ground level. When the locations of the 700 erased towns are plotted on a map and connected in the order of their elimination, they form a precise geometric pattern, a series of interconnected pentagrams covering the entire continental United States. The mathematical precision of this pattern, accounting for Earth's curvature and magnetic deviation, suggests planning that utilized knowledge and computational power beyond 1930s capabilities. Each point of intersection corresponds to locations that would later become significant in ways that couldn't have been predicted: nuclear test sites, particle accelerator facilities, deep underground military bases. The pattern suggests the towns weren't randomly selected, but were specific nodes in a grid that served purposes beyond human comprehension. The central paradox emerges in the documentary Evidence That Survived. School records from the erased towns show students who exceeded statistical norms, too many children with exceptional abilities, test scores that clustering analysis proves couldn't occur naturally. Medical records reveal populations with unusual characteristics: blood types that don't match known distributions, resistance to diseases that hadn't yet emerged, genetic markers that wouldn't be identified by science for decades. These weren't normal American towns, but communities where something fundamentally different was occurring. Something that required not just concealment, but complete elimination. The structural mechanism of erasure involved more than physical demolition. Patent Office records show the emergency classification of 312 inventions in 1938, all originating from addresses in the soon-to-be-erased towns. These patents covered technologies that seem impossible for the era: room temperature superconductors, biological computers, energy generation methods that violate thermodynamics, as understood then and now. The inventors themselves vanished along with their communities, their work confiscated under national security provisions that predated the legal framework for such actions. The technologies were either destroyed or hidden so completely that even their classification numbers were removed from indexes. The dual realities compared reveal two Americas existing simultaneously in 1938. In one, the official version, the nation struggled through the Depression, building infrastructure through New Deal programs, preparing unknowingly for World War. In the other, a shadow America, 700 communities existed in a different technological and, perhaps, dimensional framework, their inhabitants living lives that diverge from baseline humanity in ways that required their elimination. Government documents refer obliquely to timeline contamination and probability cascade prevention, terms that wouldn't enter scientific vocabulary for decades, suggesting knowledge of parallel realities and the ability to prune unwanted branches of historical development. The hypothesis forms through accumulated evidence. The Lost Communities Act wasn't about infrastructure or modernization, but about quarantine and amputation. The 700 towns had been infected or altered by something that threatened the dominant timeline. Whether this was technological contamination from future or parallel timelines, biological evolution that diverged from accepted human development, or contact with non-human intelligence, the response was the same: complete excision from reality. The populations weren't just relocated, they were removed from the timeline itself, their existence retroactively edited to maintain historical consistency. Contradictory evidence surfaces in the form of orphan memories, thousands of Americans who remember growing up in towns that don't exist, attending schools that were never built, having friends whose existence can't be verified. These individuals, scattered across the country, share detailed recollections of the same non-existent places. Support groups formed in the 1960s for people with false hometown syndrome, though psychiatry has no explanation for how multiple individuals can share identical false memories of places that supposedly never existed. Some remember the day of erasure itself, federal agents in unmarked uniforms, a sound like reality tearing, then waking up somewhere else with new identities and legal documentation that insisted their previous lives were delusions. The global context emerges through international intelligence intercepts declassified in the 1990s. British MI6 documents reference the American Containment Protocol as a model for their own Operation Whitewash. Soviet NKVD files describe capitalist reality revision with a mixture of admiration and fear. Nazi Germany's Ahnenerbe SS included analysis of the American solution to temporal anomalies in their occult research. The international intelligence community was aware that America had successfully erased 700 communities and was studying how to replicate the process. This suggests the threat wasn't unique to America, but global, requiring each nation to develop its own methods of historical sanitization. The inner reflection manifests in the psychological aftermath affecting not just survivors, but investigators. Those who dig too deeply into the Lost Communities Act report consistent symptoms: dreams of towns that feel more real than waking life, knowledge of streets they've never walked, nostalgia for places they've never been. Some researchers have had to abandon their work after developing false memories so vivid they couldn't distinguish them from their actual past. The erased towns seem to exert a gravitational pull on consciousness, trying to restore themselves through human memory. The act didn't just erase physical communities, but created a void in the collective unconscious that actively tries to fill itself. The climax arrives with the discovery of the Continuity Archive in 2003, hidden in a decommissioned missile silo in North Dakota. This repository contains the only complete record of the Lost Communities Act: photographs of the towns before erasure, recordings of their inhabitants, and most remarkably, objects that shouldn't exist, newspapers dated from years that never happened, technology that violates known physics, and biological samples from residents who were genetically human but fundamentally different. The archive's existence suggests someone in government wanted evidence preserved, perhaps as insurance against future timeline instabilities or as proof that reality itself could be edited. The consequences cascade through subsequent American history. Every major event after 1938 occurred in a reality shaped by the absence of those 700 communities. Technologies that might have emerged from the erased towns never developed. Political movements that might have originated in those communities never formed. Children who might have grown up to be leaders, inventors, artists were either never born or became different people in different places. The America we know is built on the foundation of absence, shaped as much by what was removed as by what remained. The economic boom after World War II, the social movements of the 1960s, the technological revolution of the late 20th century, all occurred in a timeline pruned of whatever divergence those 700 towns represented. Parallel evidence emerges in the phenomenon of ghost towns across America that have no history of ever being inhabited. These sites show evidence of construction, foundations, street grids, utility infrastructure, but no record of who built them or why they were abandoned. Archaeological investigation reveals they were constructed using the same techniques and materials as the erased communities, as if someone attempted to rebuild the lost towns but couldn't complete the process. These ghost towns exist in a state of permanent incompletion, neither fully real nor entirely absent, monuments to a failed attempt to restore what was deliberately destroyed. The return to the core question yields only more questions. Why did the American government erase 700 towns in 1938? The evidence points to a threat so fundamental that it required not just physical elimination but retroactive non-existence. The towns harbored something, knowledge, technology, biology, or consciousness, that couldn't be allowed to continue. The operation's success is evident in how completely it was hidden. Most Americans have never heard of the Lost Communities Act, and those who have dismiss it as conspiracy theory. The erasure was so complete that questioning it seems like madness. The temporal re-evaluation forces recognition of reality's fragility. If 700 towns and 1.4 million people could be erased from history, what else has been removed? How many times has reality been edited, with only fragmentary evidence remaining? The Lost Communities Act might not be unique, but merely the most recent and traceable of many such operations. History as we know it might be not a record of what happened, but what was allowed to remain after systematic editing. Every historical certainty becomes suspect when faced with evidence that entire communities can be retroactively eliminated from existence. The reconstruction of the lost world through fragments reveals communities that had achieved something extraordinary by 1938. The surviving evidence suggests towns where democracy had evolved beyond voting, where technology had transcended industrialization, where human potential had broken through barriers we still accept as absolute. These communities threaten not through military power or political revolution, but through existence itself, by demonstrating that alternative ways of living were not just possible, but superior. Their erasure was the ultimate conservative act, preserving the status quo by eliminating evidence that change was achievable. The true purpose unveils itself through synthesis of all evidence. The Lost Communities Act was reality maintenance, preventing a fork in human development that someone or something deemed unacceptable. The 700 towns had become infected with possibility, contaminated by futures that couldn't be allowed to manifest. Whether this was time travelers attempting to change history, parallel universe intrusions, or human evolution accelerating beyond control, the response was the same: surgical excision from the timeline. The operation succeeded in maintaining our reality's trajectory, but at the cost of possibilities we can only glimpse through the fragments that survived. The scientific analysis of materials from the erased sites reveals isotopic signatures that shouldn't exist in our timeline. Carbon dating produces impossible results. Objects that are simultaneously decades old and haven't been created yet. Metallurgical examination shows alloys that require industrial processes we haven't invented. Biological samples contain DNA sequences that are clearly human but include genes that don't exist in our species. These materials are literally from somewhere else, another time, another timeline, or another version of Earth where history developed differently. The validation of authenticity comes from the convergence of evidence across multiple independent sources. Military personnel who participated in the operation and survived into the 21st century have made deathbed confessions that corroborate each other despite no contact between witnesses. Satellite archaeology has confirmed the underground structures at erasure sites. Freedom of Information Act requests have accidentally released unredacted documents that confirm the operation's existence before being recalled and reclassified. The evidence is fragmentary but consistent. 700 American towns were deliberately erased in 1938. The motive for concealment transcends national security or political embarrassment. The truth about the Lost Communities Act would reveal that reality itself is editable. that history is not fixed, that entire populations can be eliminated not just from existence, but from ever having existed. This knowledge would destabilize not just government, but consciousness itself. If people knew that their towns, their families, perhaps they themselves could be retroactively erased, the fundamental assumptions of existence would collapse. The concealment protects not secrets, but sanity, maintaining the illusion that reality is stable and history is immutable. The philosophical collapse arrives with the vertigo-inducing implications. If the Lost Communities Act succeeded in erasing 700 towns, then we live in an edited reality, a timeline that has been pruned and shaped by forces we're not allowed to perceive. Every memory might be retroactively implanted. Every historical fact might be deliberately fabricated. Every assumption about continuity might be false. We might ourselves be living in one of the towns scheduled for erasure, our reality provisional, our existence contingent on not developing whatever triggered the elimination of those 700 communities. The closing monologue echoes through empty spaces where towns once stood, where millions lived lives that officially never happened, where children played in schoolyards that were never built, where church bells rang that were never cast. Somewhere, in dimensions we can't access or timelines we've been edited from perceiving, those 700 communities might still exist, continuing their divergent development, achieving the possibilities that required their erasure from our reality. The Lost Communities Act of 1938 stands as monument to humanity's capacity for self-amputation, cutting away parts of ourselves that grew in directions deemed unacceptable. And in the silence where those towns once stood, in the gaps in census records, in the dreams of places we've never been but somehow remember, the question persists. What did those communities discover that made their complete erasure from reality itself necessary? And are we approaching the same discovery, marking ourselves for the next round of editorial correction in the manuscript of history that someone somewhere continues to revise?